So I just want to give a warning that there are a few audio blips in this. So if the audio cuts out, changes tone, it's because we had to switch systems halfway through. It's still a great interview and I hope you enjoy it. All about the Game Academy and really education and students. So enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Games and Education Podcast, a podcast where we explore how games can be used as an educational tool to improve student education. And now, on to the show. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Games and Education. I am your host, Keenan Kibrick, and I'm here today with Joshua Archer of the Game Academy. Before we even go on, care to explain just quickly what the Game Academy is, Josh, and say hello?
Sure. Hello, everybody. The Game Academy is a educational nonprofit. We established ourselves in 2016, and our main purpose is to further the emotional, social, and academic success of children and lifelong learners, to tell you the truth, through the use of tabletop role-playing games and LARPs.
And on this, and I also will say this, I actually do work some with the Game Academy. I am one of their what's the title? It's
part of the advisory committee.
Yes, part of the advisory committee. Thank you. And I help give advice to them. So I do want to just say that right there. But they are an amazing community. And Josh is here to really talk about what this is and what all this idea is and how we can get other people to maybe want to start their own communities like this themselves. So, Josh, I guess the beginning is you've said the Game Academy is a place for students to go to run games and play them. How did you get this idea in the first place? What helped you? How'd you make this in the first place?
Right. Well, I think that like most things, this starts with a personal narrative. And for me, I started playing role-playing games back in, oh boy, in the 70s when I was in second grade. I found a group of kids that were during recess up against the wall, rolling dice, talking, having a great time. I was wondering what was going on. I was not a very athletic kid, so during PE, I usually would hang out in the field or away from everybody. This looked like an activity that I was like, what are you doing? And oh, we're playing Dungeons and Dragons. I'm like, well, what's that? I'm like, why don't you just sit down and take a character sheet and we'll explain it. And within, I don't know, 15 minutes or so, I was rolling. And ever since then, I have been involved with this activity from a not an education, but a entertainment point of view. But I did notice in looking at my narrative, looking back, this had a huge effect on my development. I'd say that before I started playing role-playing games, I was a relatively shy kid. I was not very good with speaking to others or in any way articulate. And having the practice of sitting down with a group of people and telling a story together over what turned out to be years, gave me a lot of practice, both with the socialization aspect and with telling a narrative, and also being oriented towards certain academic subjects such as mythology or history that maybe I didn't have a reason to be involved with without having an activity that I cared about and I enjoyed. And it followed me up through my entire educational career. But one doesn't usually take their hobbies and say, well, how do I make my life out of this? I had a normal career going into software development. I was an engineer for 14 years or so, and became disillusioned with the constant working for somebody else on somebody else's dreams, and tried a few companies myself, ran a web design business. Finally, just realized I needed a huge change, something new, something that really fit my soul. It was authentic. And I looked at my life and saw the two constants were role-playing games and education. I've always been involved with education, either as somebody involved from the learning aspect, or I've taught classes in adult school. I've taught classes, substitute teaching in high school, and I knew that there was untapped potential, especially for reaching kids who didn't have motivation in a traditional setting. School, the game that we call education, the game that we call school, fits by definition about 10 to 20% of the population, those that are getting A's and B's. Everything below that, you start to see a drop off of engagement. But I knew that we are storytelling creatures. We define ourselves through story. I mean, our entire life is made up of trying to create the best narrative that describes us and portrays us to others as we can. And sometimes we don't have a lot of choice with what life serves us up and where our narrative ends up. But with role playing games, with collaborative storytelling, is actually how I prefer to refer to it. We get to right off the bat define ourselves and cast ourselves in the light that we wish, and take some chances in an environment that has uh, a low consequence factor for the types of risks we might want to take. So I thought this is a great playground for kids and adults, really. But in my case, we're working with K through 12. Chance to really practice telling stories that allow us to explore parts of our personality that maybe we don't get a chance to in our everyday. um, and through that exploring subject matter as well that we don't necessarily run into in our everyday. If we are, playing a science fiction story and we're the engineer of a starship, we are bumping up against subatomic physics. We're bumping up against theoretical physics. And, these things you can scaffold as you go. If you're not really interested in that, you're probably not the kid who's playing the engineer. You're probably playing the captain or the one of the away team officers. But if you're playing the engineer, you've probably got something inside of you that likes science, that likes the concepts, and so you get to explore those concepts. And if you become interested, you find yourself, reading books about it outside of the game, just so you can play the game better. But you're also learning about those topics. So that happens, no matter what the setting is, there's something that the kids that are playing are going to grab hold of and get motivated around. So um, and we've been running since, as I said, we were established in 2016. Before that, I actually ran a business with a partner called Yokari Games, which was a for-profit version of what we're doing, for about 4 years. And so I've been at this about 6 or 7 years, and we've had kids in the program that have come up, from 10 years old. Now some of them are 17, 18 years old, and we're seeing uh, the growth that they've gone through, the capacities that they've developed, both socially and academically, are really inspiring. So I know I'm in the right business. I know what we're doing has real effect, and it's exciting to be able to do this, and to have many people participating. We're growing 50% in a year in our population over the last few years. This next year, I think we may more than double, with some partnerships that we're exploring with Lycée Francais in San Francisco and Sausalito. We're based in the San Francisco Bay Area, but our goal is to expand into a national and then hopefully an international arena, and helping others establish chapters of what we're doing right here in the Bay Area.
There's so much there that's so amazing. I love that story. Um, I actually want to know one thing first, because you say K-12. What are some of the youngest? Because I've been trying to work with classes. I'm now moving into working more with elementary next year.
Hmm.
Uh, what are the younger grades that you've actually been able to do the game academy with? How young have you seen role players? I mean, I have a daughter who's 6 and
Right.
she can play a little bit of role playing.
Hmm.
But what do you notice with games? What is a good age to start role playing games with, or is it for everyone?
Right. Well, first off, let's handle that last question first. I don't know if it's for everyone. I mean, I think that everyone tells and likes to hear stories. That's for certain. That's part of what we do in our living of our lives. But to pretend to be someone else and to work from that point of view comes easier for some than to others. It comes easier to children of younger ages than it does to kids that are a little bit older. So we traditionally in our program, we say K through 12, but we tend to take kids around 9 or 10. So about second, third, fourth grade is when we start them in the program, mostly because when you're talking about role playing games, there's the play and then there's the game. And the game part is understanding systems, abstracting what you want your character to do into a set of rules that determine, whether or not you're successful. And younger kids, this is a little bit of a harder concept to hold on to. So I would say for the most part, if your children are role playing, if they are on the playground or in the classroom or at home playing with doll houses, talking from the perspectives of their dolls, or telling stories where they're the heroes of the story. I see this. I mean, I wouldn't say it's universal, but it's something that I think kids do more readily. Then they're already doing role play. And if you want to coach them towards more structured role play, you can introduce little elements that add kind of a random factor so that it's not just, I want to do this, I do it. It's more, I want to do this, let's see if I can do it. And I think that the rule system is what helps persistent role play continue in groups. If you watch kids on the playground, younger kids, you'll see them playing superheroes or army men or whatever it is, and they usually declare their own powers and their own. I got this power. I can shoot lasers out of my eyes. Like, well, I have a shield that reflects your lasers off of my shield. Like, well, my lasers are more powerful than your shield, so they cut right through. And eventually that negotiation breaks down where they're like, well, I quit because this is just like us going back and forth about who's more powerful. But if you have some externalized system that says, okay, well, you try to do that, let's see if you're successful, then there's this arbitration that happens that can keep people in the game if everybody agrees to that set of rules. And so I think that's the benefit that you get from using role-playing game systems, is that it helps adjudicate the desires that people have for the narrative they want to push so that those can happen in the same space, right? So I'd say our success rate is, second, third grade is when kids start to have the focus for this, but we work with kids that are younger, usually just with very loose role play with little elements of adjudication, maybe Rochambeau, or maybe a six-sider, or flipping a coin, or card decks, or things like that can add elements. And it's fun, and there's some surprise elements there, so the kids can get excited about results. It also teaches them how to handle failure. And that's, I think, one of the biggest problems we have in our educational system at large, is that everything seems to be higher and higher stakes. I mean, you fail a test, you get a low grade, your grade in the class goes down, then your chances for getting into college gets, I mean, the narrative is a common narrative, we know. But being able to pick yourself up after a mistake or a failure is an essential part of living, and it happens in professional life all the time. If you're not making mistakes, you're probably not learning. And so having the chance to teach kids that a failure, quote unquote, is really just opening up of a new vista of opportunities, new decisions to be made, allows them to take more chances and to not have a risk-averse attitude develop. So I kind of drifted off the direction of your question, but I think the main point is that the younger that you work, the less structure you can introduce. But the less worried you have to be, because I think kids, as I said, are already doing role play naturally when they're young. It's usually when they're being told by their peers or by their teachers or their environment that you need to stop playing, that's when the danger happens, that they may not hold on to the ability to tell these narrative stories.
That's so much great. I don't even care if I'm off on a tangent. That is exactly the type of stuff I wanted to learn about. You're right. Failure is one of the best things about role-playing games. They learn to do that. Even my daughter, I never really thought of it that much, but we play a game. Have you ever heard of the Siblings Trouble?
No.
It's actually, I really encourage this for anybody who has young children and wants to get into the role-playing games. It's a card game, but it's basically a role-playing game with cards where you go to encounters and roll 1d6 and use little items for it. And it's all based on the art is very
8-year-old centric or 7-year-old centric. And
Hmm.
I absolutely love the game playing with my daughter, because you're right, the failure part I notice all the time. In this game, when she gets something wrong, she doesn't care that much. She just thinks of another idea, or she knows in the game she can ask for help when they fail.
Right.
And that's also such a great cooperative thing, because I want to talk about that for a sec. When we talk about all these different things with students, and I heard this from Ben Robbins, I want to talk about you. Everybody's mentioning collaboration. That seems like one of the biggest aspects of this that I really want to hear more about, why that is so important. Because, if you talk to people who don't
Hmm.
play games, they probably think most of this is a creative aspect, because you're creating a world or you're creating this. But it really sounds like to everybody, the creation is less important than learning how to collaborate and work with others. In your
Right.
academy right there, what have you noticed about people learning and growing with collaboration with it? Are they becoming more collaborative and
Hmm.
working better together by playing games? Have you noticed that that is a common thing that occurs? And how do you help foster that even more?
Right, right. Yes, I do have to say, I mean, um, collaboration is one of the main aspects, one of the main features of role-playing games. And it differs from normal games, like board games that tend to be the opposite of collaborative, or competitive, where you have a winner and you have a loser. And so much of academics is kind of oriented in this way too. I know that classrooms try to introduce group projects, but it's really the sort of exception to the rule. In reality, we're all playing a game where we're taking tests and learning facts and doing projects and competing against each other for the highest grade in the class. And that sets up an aspect of distrust, holding your cards close to your chest, not sharing, which ends up being problematic in the workplace. We don't do business as cowboys, shooting one another for the highest rank on the scoreboard. In fact, when I was in software engineering, one of the biggest problems that we would have were the really hotshot programmers that couldn't work with other people. That it was almost worse to have one of these people on your team than it was to have people less skilled but more able to work together. Kids do come into the program with a competitive aspect already built into them from be it their schooling or the environment that we're growing up in our society, and we there's they learn very quickly, and we help them, we scaffold them through this process. We see it manifests with a Me Too type of aspect, for one thing. Like if there's a test that one of the characters, like, so we'll back up. In a role-playing game, in a collaborative role-playing game, it's an ensemble cast, so it's less like Jason and the Argonauts and more like Scooby-Doo, where every character has their own particular strengths and their own particular weaknesses. And so when you run into certain types of tests, I mean, let's take a fantasy role-playing game like Dungeons and Dragons for an example, and you might have a fighter, you have a thief, you have a magic user, and you have a cleric, and each one of them has their own particular things they do well. And if you are in a group and you've got the kids, uh, and there's this a mechanical trap, and it's got whirring blades and gears, and the person who's best suited to fix this problem is the thief or the rogue. And one of the kids might say, okay, I'm the rogue, I want to diffuse this trap. I'm gonna break it so we can get past it. And then the fighter says, oh, I want to do that too. Well, I want to be part of this scene. I want to be in that scene. And then the wizard says, I want to do that too. And so you end up with a Me Too attitude, where every test, every single kid needs to step up to the plate and be part of that test. And we teach them to look at their own specialties and to look at the specialties of the people in their group, and to realize that if you are not very good at doing this, you can cause the problem to get worse. But if you rely on the member of your team who is good at this particular kind of test, then we all benefit and we all move forward without getting danger, without being hit by whirling blades or blasts of fire, or things like that. So it's a lesson that takes a little while to learn, but they do understand it, and they start to understand. Oh, this is a scene that my character is good at. And we teach them that if you're holding that space for other people, they hold it for you. That you have confidence that your scene is coming, and that we also can scaffold this or mitigate it by something that we call character advice. We allow for other players at the table to raise their hand, and if the person who's acting in the scene at that moment wishes, they can accept the player advice. The person can just say, well, I think that you might want to do it this way, or you might want to, try this particular angle. And then it is up to the player then to either accept that advice or to not use that advice. And the person who gives the advice has to be okay with that. So it builds in a way to give constructive criticism, but allow the agency to stay in the hands of the person whose scene it really is. And so I think that this type of practice allows people to develop an understanding of team dynamics, and to understand and value the strengths of others, and to realize, like, I don't need to be good at everything. I just need to be good at what I'm good at, and I should know what my team is good at as well.
I love that so much. I can't even, I'm almost speechless at that. I need to use that more with games with children. I haven't thought of I mean, it's so funny. In every role-playing game, they talk about it, but it kind of always gets pushed to the side a little bit. When someone's in a scene, you need to let them and embrace it. But I love the suggestion advice to teaching that to students as making it part of it. That is such a great idea. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
With that, though, I do want to go to something else too about games that I'm very curious about. In traditional role-playing games like a Dungeons and Dragons and a lot of other games, you have a game master, somebody who's running it to adjudicate rules. And I know I've worked so much with classrooms to try to escape having that game master some, because I find that a very hard task for some students to handle. And I'm curious with younger students, do you do games without game masters, or how do you teach students to be them? How do you teach students to be okay with one other student adjudicating the rules? Because I know that was my most frustrating thing growing up with role-playing games, is either saying the GM's being unfair or being an unfair GM. And it took a very long time for me to become a kind of great storyteller that is there for the players, but also wants to give them challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And since this is so big in so many games, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on it? Do you do games with game masters and young children? And if so, how do you do it? How do you handle it? What's your strategy? Because the game master is so integral to so many games. I just want to know how that storyteller aspect goes in. Or do you do what I try to do, is find as many games without a storyteller, because that's the only way I can think of handle it sometimes.
Right. So the games that we play are almost exclusively with a storyteller or a narrator role, a facilitator of the story. And for the most part, it is the volunteers and employees of the Game Academy that play that role. But we also do train and give opportunities for kids that have been in the program a bit to take their hand at being the game master, because we think it's an important aspect of understanding how this activity happens. To be given the power of the facilitator is a heady thing, and it can be abused. And we try to model in our own game mastering of the games a certain amount of flexibility and empowerment of the players. So we in no case do we consider ourselves to be better than or more superior than our players. If a player has an idea that they really would like to push forward, we might bend where we were going in order to let that happen. Certain game systems have this as a mechanic in them.
One of the game systems that we use that has elements in it that allows players to have a little bit more agency and can fight some of the problems that you might have with game masters having too much power is called Fate. And the Fate system has a mechanism in it called Fate Points, which players collect through good role play or through discovery, through achievement. And they can use those in many different capacities. They can use them to increase their character's capabilities, but more often than not, they can use those fate points to establish facts in the world, in the narrative that you're co-creating with the game master. So they can use a fate point to say, I have this tool in my backpack that's necessary to solve this problem, when maybe it wasn't written down on a character sheet. Or I can spend a fate point and say, I've got contacts in this underworld establishment that we're trying to infiltrate, and they are able to make the connection for us that otherwise wouldn't be possible. And so you end up with a negotiation between the game master and the player through the use of these fate points. Other game systems have mechanisms similar to this. Monte Cook Games has the Cipher system, and they have their character points can be used in the same way. And it kind of blurs the edge between game master and player, so that you are teaching the players that the game master is not always 100% in control. In games where it's more structurally that the narrator has more absolute power, we still rely on reference to game rules and give an externalized view of arbitration, so that when we finally give the opportunity for kids in the program, maybe they've been in 2 or 3 years, to try their hand at game mastering, they don't have a model given by us of an autocrat. It's not, haha, I'm now the king of the game, and you're going to have to do as I say, otherwise your character dies. It's really about, how do we negotiate together so that we're all having a good time. The primary mechanism of character advancement and rewards are these things called fate points. You get them for role-playing well, or discovering something, or overcoming some sort of obstacle. And those points can either be used to advance your character's capabilities, or more often than not, they can be used as a way for you to establish facts in the world as a player that you would not normally have power to do from a player's position. So you might use a fate point to say, I happen to have in my backpack the exact right tool to unlock this door, even though it's not written down on my character sheet. Or I might be able to use a character point to say, we're trying to infiltrate this underground, criminal society, and I happen to have a friend who is part of that organization, and they're able to make introductions and get us in the back door, so to speak. And so it gives players more of a handle on the narrative than they traditionally would have. We've adopted a similar mechanism actually across all the games that we play. We don't call them fate points, but we call them character points. So we give the players in the program a character point if they've done something that's really true to the way their character should be played. Maybe it's something they said that made the whole group laugh, increased engagement, or maybe they really played into one of their limitations or weaknesses, even though as a player they might have responded differently. Their character doesn't have the same capacities. So maybe you're playing a character who's lower in certain knowledges than you are, and you just have to sort of swallow your own personal knowledge and say, well, I didn't know that. Or to play a character who's a hothead, or to play a character that has a certain character flaw. If the players do that well, we want to reward them. And so these character points then can be used to, again, modify reality in the game, or can be used to re-roll a failed roll. So it gives them a little bit more leverage and control. That gives a good modeling for a collaborative relationship, not only between the players, but between the players and the game master, or the narrator, so that when the kids decide, I'd like to try my hand at running a game, and often we wait until the kids have been in the program a couple of years before we do that, we'll set them up and help them come up with a story, and coach them through what it takes to be a good game master, and then set them up to run the game for their gaming group that meets weekly or whatever that is for their particular group. And we help them find success. And It teaches them that you can be a leader in a narrative capacity without being an autocrat. That it really is a collaboration at all levels. So that helps, I think, to really break down some of the traditional stereotypes of the game master being out to get the party, or being closed-minded and unwilling to allow others to share in the direction of the narration. Because at base, we're all deciding to sit down to the game together. And even if we're doing this in an educational context, games by definition are voluntary, and you would not want to volunteer for an activity that you weren't enjoying.
So let's talk about that for a second, because I do want to know two parts of that, really. So I'll start with one, then the other. The first one is, you mentioned in there that they take a few years to learn how to be a GM. How do you get other people to want to be these game masters and narrators in your academy? Because I look at a teacher that wants to start a gaming group, because even myself, I'm thinking of starting one at my schools. I start a gaming group, I'm one person, so I can really run a game for, typically games maximum number of people is 5. How do you get more people to want to do this and to learn how to do that, so they could also help facilitate more people wanting to play?
Right. So this is one of the bottlenecks of this activity. It certainly does challenge a traditional classroom dynamic, because unless you're in a very exclusive private school, your classes have more than 5 kids. And how do you create this type of activity to happen simultaneously with a limitation on your resources? This is one of the reasons why we don't work in the classroom generally. We work as an extracurricular activity. We have volunteers from our community, or we have employees that run the games to begin with. But I think as you start this activity, some of the participants are going to find that they are drawn to being behind that chair, being the person who's the director of the story. And others are really just happy being players, and that's as far as they'd like to take it. We try to promote the game mastering in our kids that have been in the program for more than a few years by setting up round robin opportunities where, okay, this next coming week, Billy's going to be the game master, and then after a couple of weeks later, we're going to have Jane do it. And even if they don't have any experience, we coach them through it. But I think to create a vibrant, engaging community of gamers, that's a role that really should be passed back and forth. And so setting up the expectations in the beginning that, maybe you'll kick it off as the game master to begin with, but you want to pass that role on to somebody else. You don't have to make it daunting. You can use pre-made adventures. You can use stories that have been written by other people, and just coach the kids through that activity with all of the scaffolding in place. And again, some are going to take to it readily. Some are going to need a little bit more coaching. But I do think it's a really important part of the learning process, not only to learn how to be a good character in a story, but how to hold the container. And the encouragement, I think, really just comes from showing how fun it is and having a good time with it, and having the players be in a supportive role to the game master as opposed to an adversarial. So maybe the use of things like character points or fate points is a way to alleviate the burden a bit on the game masters. Or maybe you can make it so that you have the game master position rotate every session, and they just take it from where the group left off. This also helps, I think, with teaching the separation between what your player, what you as a player knows, and what your character knows. So if you were a game master and you knew what was happening behind the scenes, how well can you practice putting that knowledge to the side and acting as if you don't know it? That's a higher level type of thinking that younger kids are not as proficient at. But I think kids that are in your 12 and up range have the capacity to do this, and it really challenges them to realize that the activity is not about the winning or the advancement of your character, but about how well the story gets told, right? Traditional rewards of, uh, gold pieces and beating the monster and having all of the rewards of the knowledges, it starts to be challenged when you have to say, well, my character doesn't know what I know, and how do I be true to that character? I think that type of higher level thinking is incredibly useful, especially when you start to think about skills like empathy and really trying to get inside somebody else's perspective, even though you have a different perspective. So that's another type of learning I think that can happen from maybe doing a round robin type of game mastering situation.
That's great
Mm-hmm.
information for people that wants to start GMing and getting other people to do it, or these volunteers. I like that about the ages. For teachers or other people that are listening to this podcast that want to try games with their students, is there a system, a game you'd recommend that is easiest to get into? Because I know a lot of teachers, even I've worked with, they're very interested in this, but they haven't done role-playing games much, but they want to try to do this with students. Are there
Right.
game systems you'd recommend that are very easy, kind of like gateways? I know for myself, I use Microscope because Microscope is just a world building game. And so you start with world building and then a little bit of doing scenes in it, but they're just random scenes, can really open up to a more easy game. But what have you noticed are the games that just easily gets people into it, and especially might be easy for someone in a game master role to start it out if they were these teachers that were trying to do this for the first time?
Right. So I think that simpler is certainly better. That going with a system with not a large amount of rules is probably your best bet. So a game system like Fate, they have even a stripped down version of it called Fate Accelerated, which really is, there's like, you can play it with I think there's like 5 or 6 pages of rules that are what's necessary to know how to play, and it's flexible. So something like that allows you to tell a story without the rules getting in the way of understanding the narrative. Some kids are going to gravitate towards this type of storytelling because it really gives them more agency and more control over the narrative. Other kids are going to be gravitating towards more externalized systems where it's very tactical in nature. I think that your kids that are video gamers and are used to seeing tactical layouts might enjoy a game like Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or something like that, which has maybe some more rules, but the rules are really about physical space. And you use miniatures and a map, and it allows them to really kind of grok the scene, where something like Fate is told in what's called the theater of the mind, where you don't depend so much on visualization as you do on your own mental understanding of the scene. So I mean, there's no one size fits all answer to that question. It's really about knowing your population. But if you've never done it before, starting with a system that isn't very complex, something like Fate or Monty Cook's Cipher system, these give you a small amount of scaffolding, and then the game is really about exchanging the story between one another. And then you can build from there. You can figure out, okay, my kids really enjoyed this type of gaming. We'll continue with these types of sort of story heavy system light systems, or I found them itching for more control or more I don't know, more adjudication of the scene, like, well, do I really have line of sight on the person, for the laser shot, or how far away am I from the blast radius of that explosion? Those types of people, that type of thinking lends itself to more rigid or more tactical type of environments, and you'll get a knowledge of what your kids are into by how they react to what you start with. But simple first, then go complex.
Thank you for that. I totally agree with simple systems. I'm myself trying to work out a way to do a not Apocalypse World itself, because Apocalypse World is a very adult system, but like a dungeon world system with students where the GM doesn't even have hit points for monsters. There is no such thing as hit points. It is the players roll some dice and it actually spells out what rules you do. So I agree with you. I love simplicity like that much more than, you know, I have this many hit points +1, +2. They have this resistance shielding, or even, you know, I like you. I do like the theater of the mind games because, yeah, they get such a good story. But I will admit there is definitely also a place for those people who like a tactical mindedness and just want that brain to tactically think of things.
Right. And I think one thing that, you know, we have to also keep in mind is that a lot of kids in today's environment are used to playing video games. So concepts like hit points might be more natural to them than we first consider. You know, they're playing games where their characters have status bars and they're, you know, taking hits, and, you know, they have a real sense of what it is to be, you know, 50% down or 75% down or 3 points from dying or whatnot. So they might actually feel more comfortable in those types of systems than they would be in something that's looser. So that's just sort of the devil's advocate. Like I do find that simpler systems are easier to absorb for a majority, especially younger kids. But, you know, if you're teaching 4th graders, 5th graders, chances are they're playing video games at home and they understand these capacities. And if you take that video game and create a role-playing game that feels, you know, closer to that, they might feel more comfortable in playing.
That's a fair point, and I think that's a good thing for the audience to hear, that, yeah, play to your audience. Speaking of playing to your audience, I have a question, because this was asked at a panel I was at with a other member of the Game Academy, Aaron Vonek. He will be on the show eventually, I'm sure. But you know, they asked, well, what about, like, do you notice any gender differences? Is it just mainly boys, girls? I know I'm a big believer that everybody's a role player, boys, girls, and everybody does want to play. But I know a lot of teachers might think, well, this is only a boys thing or a girls thing. Have you noticed during the Game Academy that there is a good mix of people playing, or that there is some good, you know, different genders going on? What are your thoughts on that? Because I know I'm a believer everybody plays games and they all love it. My wife plays, my daughter plays. But have you noticed that to be the thing, or is that just a misconception? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that historically speaking, that the role-playing game community has suffered from being male-heavy, but those numbers have shifted over time. To today, you've got as many women and girls playing role-playing games for entertainment as you do men and boys. It might be, you know, off by about 10% or something like that, but it really comes down to, is the environment welcoming, and is the story something that's compelling? And I think traditionally, you know, early types of role-playing games were all about violent action and reward through wealth. You know, the kill the monster, get the treasure. And that may not be something that is off the top attractive to a female audience. They have a different socialization that they go through than boys do. And, you know, this is just on average. I think that you've got plenty of women who love to play hack and slash games. And you've got, you know, men such as myself who prefer maybe a more complex, more role play rich environment. But that being said, I think, you know, we have girls in our program. We definitely have more boys than girls in our program. I think it's maybe like 20% girls, if that. We're working hard to increase that level. But if you can and cast a story that's about things that they care about and that uses mechanisms for solving conflict that aren't necessarily violence first, you might find that it's more attractive to a female audience. You might also have a table where you know, make sure that you're balanced in your boy-girl ratios. We've tried girl-only tables, and we find that actually, as much as you think that might be useful, it's not as inviting as it is to have a good mix between boys and girls. I think that you see a benefit on the boys' side where they're goofy, overreacting, over violent type of behaviors might calm a little bit, and you might see the girls at the table joining into that type of play a little bit more and being more engaged. So I think that there is definitely stigma to be overcome when it comes to this type of, what play is appropriate for boys and what play is appropriate for girls that, we inherit. And we just have to sort of move through and say, well, no, storytelling is for everyone. And we just have to find out what kind of story you like to tell and then work from there.
That's an awesome answer. I'm glad to hear that we are trying that. I like that idea of mixing the genders. That makes so much sense for children, because they get to get the best of both sides that way. In fact, I read articles recently, I don't know where it was talking about that they're encouraging girls to be more playful and get out there, be more rough and tumble, and also encouraging boys to take a more, calming, dialogue. I'm trying, the word you use is now escaping me. A more mind's eye type of play. So the merge does sound great. I'm glad to hear that. At this point, is there anything you want to tell to the audience of people? These are teachers, educators, maybe some students, about running a kind of game academy like you're doing wherever they are. What is the first step they should do? What do you want them to do? How do you encourage them to do this? And what do you recommend to get started? Because I think that'd be great. And they can get started too. So anybody can do this. And secretly I'm asking because I want to run it myself in where I live. So whatever you have, I'm probably going to replicate and hear the ideas. So yeah, please share.
Sure. So one of the things that we're hoping to do at the Game Academy is to become a clearinghouse for supportive materials for just this type of thing. That our mission is to get as many people involved in this activity as possible. So reach out to us and ask for pointers. We'll be trying to put things up on our website as we go forward. But getting started, I think it's a matter of just taking a poll of your population and finding out what kind of fiction and what type of storytelling they already engage in, and to match your stories and the content to those types of worlds. If you find that your kids are really into sports, you can make a role-playing game that is about a team, and what happens behind the scenes. It doesn't all have to be high fantasy or science fiction or the types of high stakes environments that we're used to dealing with. You can meet them where they're at, or you can blend those ideas. Maybe they are a football team in the year 2400 and the rules have changed. Now they have jetpacks, or maybe you are dealing with a group of individuals that are really into, I'm not sure, sewing costumes. Maybe they're costumers. So maybe they are part of the narrative that they're producing is that they're fashion designers. Or, you can find the right type of story that matches the audience interests, and you're going to be far more successful if you do that than trying to bring a story to the group and saying we're going to all be in European medieval fantasy. And if they don't have an interest in that, it's going to be a hard sell. So really picking the right environment and story, starting with simple systems, showing your humility as the narrator that you are capable of making mistakes, and that's okay, and that everyone is allowed to make mistakes at the table. To laugh through those mistakes and to really destigmatize failure, because that's really the point that we want to get to, so that your players are more capable of taking chances, both within the game and outside of the game. So I guess that's where I would start. Take a look at systems like Fate. Take a look at systems like Monte Cook's Cipher system for simpler systems to start with. There are a handful of others. I will try to compile a list and have that up as one of the resources of different types of systems and how they fit certain types of educational arenas.
There are so many systems. As I say, like I just played Downfall, which is a great system by Carolyn Hobbs. And it's just a pure story system, but it also has so many elements. But I do agree that sometimes it is good to have the dice in there for failure. I will say, if you get a chance, check out Dungeon World or some of the world systems.
Mhm.
I'm just telling it to the audience because they have it's just 2 dice that you roll, and it kind of does give you descriptions of what happens when you fail and lets the player choose how they want it. So gets that, once again, that collaboration storytelling. I will say, avoid the original world, Apocalypse World. While I love it and the creator is going to be on my show, it is very adult themed. So drop it down to some of the other world systems. But yeah, I agree with that. So much about the education and the failure and how that is important does seem to be such a great aspect we can teach students. I realize, Josh, that time is up for this podcast, but I'm going to have you on again because we didn't even talk about LARP. And that is like a whole section that is a passion of mine, such a great thing. We didn't even touch on it today. So we need to really talk more. But for now, thank you, Josh, for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing your experiences with the Game Academy. And if anybody wants to get all this information, how do they go? Where can they go? Who should they email? Because I'm pretty sure a lot here would like to know more about the Game Academy and how they can get started and be part of it.
Sure. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show. You can go to our website at http://www.thegameacademy.org. You can email me, joshua@thegameacademy.org, or info@, and it goes to a group of people that can answer questions. I'll be happy to share any wisdom that I have and get you started. We are also hoping to start up chapters in different communities. If you would like to work with us more closely, we can talk about what it would look like to get Game Academy into your community.
Thank you so much for all of that. Thank you for everything in your conversation, and look forward to, I'm sure we'll have you on again for more gaming and discussions, because everything you're doing sounds perfect for education. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Games and Education podcast. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast. Also, if you could on any of those sites, please leave us a review, like on Apple Podcast, and share this with your friends. Reviews and shares help the podcast get noticed so that new listeners can join in as well. If you'd like to speak more and join the conversations about education and games, please join the Google group Immersive Imaginative Education, tweet me at kkibteach, or email me at gamesanded@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and good luck gaming.